All right, so feel free to raise your hand with this, but how many of you guys in this auditorium have any sort of job, whether it be full-time or part-time? Great, so at least one of you will relate to what I'm about to say. So let's talk about the current state of what I like to call work culture in America today. So this can be anything from work, school, or just really anything that life throws at you. We get bogged down, we get caught up, and in the time we have left, well, actually in modern times, there tends to not be a lot of that. It tends to be a lot of just jumping from the next thing we have to do to the next thing we have to do without having really any time for ourselves. Americans have had such a societal shift into work culture that free time and leisure time are really a thing of the past. This shift away from leisure is something that is detrimental to Americans and American society as a whole. So today we're going to be discussing why this shift happened, what this shift has done, and how we can change this shift and get back our free time. So let's go ahead and start out with this scenario. So have you guys ever been on your morning commute either to work or to school and thought, man, did I finish that morning project, or did I remember my lunch or my gloves? While this might be a reason that we've all had and a situation that we've all found ourselves in, the reason that we have to be in this situation is because the importance that America puts on work. If we go to our next slide, we have to look at this societal shift. So before modern times, a lot of things came from your job, including your identity. This also included your last name. If we look at names like Smith, Cooper, and Wright, these names were associated with the job that you did. If you made tools or any sort of woodworking, you would be considered a smith. So instead of being Noah Oliver, if I made tools back in the day, I would have very well been called Noah Smith. This meaning that if you heard my name, you could assume that if you needed any sort of tool, you could come to me and I would be your guy. Along with this, the societal evolution from almost working as an identity for a job came with the Industrial Revolution, which when Henry Ford adopted the assembly line due to Ford Motor Company and paying his workers enough where they could buy what they were producing, along with this making factories to be able to up production tenfold, came with a societal shift where more than work became your identity. You were able to go home and do what you wanted and purchase the things you were making due to the fact that Henry Ford was paying you the fair enough wage to be able to buy your very own Model T. But it would have been a great idea to not take ideas from a guy who is sourced as one of the greatest Americans and the only one of us with a good idea from a certain Austrian painter who also wrote a little book called Mein Kampf. But we live and we learn, and we continue to move on. Along with this, we can see that there is a big use of unfairness when it comes to the way we do work. We can see that in modern times, women and men have had an unproportionally amount of unpaid work when it comes to even after the workday. In the book of The Forgotten American Dream by Benjamin Honeycutt, we can see that throughout the book, the Americans have pushed farther and farther away from leisure time and more towards production. The book also goes into how it's unfairly split between men and women. And it details in its third chapter how women, even after entering the workforce full-time and family becoming dual income, are still expected to pick up an almost extra shift when they get home and doing homemaking. This obviously isn't a fair thing, and as you can see by this graph, it has a disproportionate effect on how America looks at men and women when it comes to the amount of unpaid work they're doing. Along with this, COVID-19 has had a huge impact on how America views its work culture. When COVID hit, 89% of Americans saw negative impacts to their jobs. This also led to something called a telecommute, which instead of, like I saw in the first slide, driving to work, you would simply log on, enter your password, and hop on a Zoom meeting, and then you're at work. This obviously led to a lot of people working from home and liking to work from home, but it also led to increased rates of burnout and anxiety, which is what we're about to get into. So what is the effect of the shift? This shift has both had its upsides and its downsides. On the upside, we can see that working from home does benefit people. It can help people keep people safe and cut down on carbon emissions due to the less driving. So we're helping the climate and reducing car accidents. But that's all the positives, and that's where they really end. In an article from Britannica, it explores the modern work condition known as workaholism, or the addiction to work. The article defines workaholism as a compulsive disorder or an addiction to work. work. It discusses the impacts of being around a workaholic. Some of the impacts being burnout, high levels of stress, and feelings of anxiety. And this is a real condition that does affect people in today's world. The creation of modern work culture in society, along with its modern work society, is making Americans, frankly, miserable. In 2021, Jennifer Sherman explains that Americans that are going in the direction of prioritizing work over any real-life need or obligation, this prioritization shows that the measuring work as your worth amount is something that is completely unhealthy. So pretty much the thing is that we as Americans are starting to measure how much we're worth and how our self-esteem is based on how much work we've done either in a day, in a week, in a month, or frankly, in a year, which is leading to where we see America today, where it's not necessarily, are you a good person? Are you willing to help? Or anything like that. It's how much do you make? How much do you produce? How much do you work? Are you busy with work, or are you sitting at home every day after work, even after a full day's work, sitting in your chair? You may not be worth as much and your self-esteem may go down. So how as Americans can we start to push away from this? Well, it has to look at not looking at the geological factors. Along with the effects of COVID and the prioritization of work, geological factors also have a big part in what we're doing today. So the geological factors pretty much state that if a smaller area is producing, so say Pittsburgh, Kansas has a car factory that produces 5,000 cars a day, but the Kansas City metro area has one that produces 10,000 cars a day. The Pittsburgh factory might try to keep up by working longer hours and pushing its workers to produce more to look as equal as that Kansas City factory. Well, this leads to burnout, stress, and unfair work practices, and due to the fact that Kansas City is simply just a bigger area, Pittsburgh won't be able to compete. It's not the fact that the workers aren't working as hard or there isn't as many of them. It's the fact that there's just so many more due to the population and the geological factors in Kansas City that leads people to see themselves as lesser because they're not competing with a bigger area. So we need to push away from that. Along with this, how can we as Americans start to change this? Well, it has to do with the fact that we can simply say no. If we say no to being on that committee or being asked to work on Saturday or even just something that isn't necessary for our position, we can take back our free time and have more of a work-life balance that we need. Along with this, take charge and do the things that you enjoy. Read that book. Go take your dog for a walk, play the video games, or simply even just take a nap in your favorite chair. You don't always have to be working to live a successful life, and that's something that America today has really pushed away from. Success is defined by how much work you do, how much you make, and how much you're able to produce. And because of this, it's something that has led to an unhealthy and unfair work balance in America. So, with that, what we need to really do in America today is realize that the work isn't how much we're worth. Because you may not work as many hours as somebody else doesn't mean you're lesser or a worse person. So today, what I want all of you to take away is maybe you work 4 hours in a week and your friend works 6. Just because you might have had a lesser or not as long shift, it doesn't mean that you're lesser of a worker or of a person. So with that, thank you.